Alright folks, it's time. It's time for me to go ahead. I hope you're having a great day today. It's time for me to look at the Lord of the Rings of military science fiction, or the 1984 of military science fiction, Robert E. Heinlein's Starship Troopers. And we're going to be taking a look at this classic epic work in my favorite genre of science fiction. I have read more books in military science fiction than I have in any other science fiction subgenre, probably any other science fiction subgenre, multiple ones of them combined. I've just read a lot of them. My love for this genre in science fiction comes from the Battletech series, which I read when I was a kid, and I have gone back and read a bunch of those. And I've also read a number of other things from people like David Drake, Fred Saberhagen's Berserker stuff, that sort of thing. And a lot of stories have military science fiction aspects to them. I've also reviewed for you The Battle of Dorking, which is the first military science fiction and one of the first science fiction works too. It's also the first of the Invasion series that's popular during the Penny Dreadful era. So this is not the first military science fiction story I'm doing for you, but it is the biggest. Again, it's the most influential. Just like The Lord of the Rings was not the first heroic fantasy story, but every heroic fantasy story that followed would be influenced by it. And just like 1984 was not the first modern dystopian novel by any stretch of the imagination, but everything that came later would be written with 1984 in mind. Similarly, Starship Troopers is the defining work in military science fiction. And if you're a fan of military science fiction, you have read this novel and you like this novel. Or maybe you don't, but you've read it. So I want to go ahead and kind of take a look at Starship Troopers. Now, I have reviewed for you a Robert E. Heinlein before. I've reviewed for you one of his short stories that I did for you, The Roads Must Roll. His stuff tends to be more philosophical in nature. He's won 4 Hugo Awards. Now, this guy was incredibly interesting. He started off as this incredibly liberal, incredibly progressive guy. He ran for candidate from Liberal Democrats in California, lost, but he would run for. He'd help support campaigns of very liberal people. His first wife was also very liberal too. So you know, the basic biographers of Robert E. Heinlein suspect that her influence on him led him to become more and more liberal. And then in the late 40s, he divorces her. And then will remarry this very, very conservative person, and then slowly over time, he becomes more and more conservative. But he still was, he still considered himself libertarian. If you asked him what his political viewpoint was, he would tell you he's a libertarian, not liberal or conservative. And more importantly, he still kept some of his liberal tendencies, like his free love, open marriages, swinger aspects. He did that for both the liberal partner that he had first, and then his conservative partner that he had second. And he had 6 years and 3 major hits, all of which won Hugo Awards, and all 3 of which are very, very different works. Starship Troopers is a pro-conservative, pro-military book that is incredibly conservative. This is a paean to conservative love, conservative ideology, a modern conservative treasure trove of ideas, all come from this book. 2 years later, he publishes Stranger in a Strange Land, which is the book for liberals, for hippies, for people who care about free love, and that sort of thing. This is that sort of tribute. This book could not feel more different than this book, even though they were just 2 years apart. But Stranger in a Strange Land is the paean for liberals and liberal ideas, and is the biggest book when it comes to those sorts of things. And then his book that came a couple of years later, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, could not be more libertarian in nature. Again, how is this massive libertarian work written by the conservative Starship Troopers or the liberal Stranger in a Strange Land? No clue. But it was, and that sort of thing. So I'm going to be reviewing for you. I'm starting to move more towards some classics. Initially, this channel was about reviewing works that you either had not heard about or were authors that you had heard about, but not these works by them. And the idea was to unearth lost treasures. But I've done occasional classics for you here and there, like Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. You know, when I was having a conversation with some people about it, and I wanted to have some things, and I had some things to say about it, so I put it in a video. It has done some classics. I think one of the things I want to start doing is maybe moving more into some other classics here and there and popping them up. here and there for you. I think that might be a good entry point into the series from people who are not familiar with, they may not be searching for Earthabides, because Earthabides is a lost classic, but in the science fiction genre in the 50s, but they might be searching for this 1950s science fiction, and so they say, hey, look, yeah, I love Starship Troopers, here's a great review by it, and then they'll turn around and take a look at my channel and say, oh, well, what about these other stories, right? And that, hopefully that will lead them to some other places, and so that's kind of the goal of this series, is to do that. So I'm going to start probably including some more classics here and there, sprinkled about the series, because again, it was originally trying to find things that were that you were not already having a bunch of reviews by. But I think I've got to the point now where I want to add in some more classics here and there. So you can expect to see more of these classic works starting to trickle up to the top of the page, and Starship Troopers is definitely a classic of the science fiction genre. Now, my criticism when I first read this book was that, before I do that, let me do you a quick synopsis. This will open up with Johnny Rico, who is a Filipino person. He won't learn that until later on in the novel, like much later on in the novel. He's opening up the first chapter. He is on this planet with his power armor and leading a group of people in battle against an alien race. It's actually, I think, the best chapter in the book. And then he'll talk about how that came to happen, and there'll be a number of flashbacks with him in his basic camp training, in his high school, him in officers training, and those sorts of things. And it'll move forward, and then move back, and it'll move forward and move back. And the voice of consciousness that he has is his high school history and moral philosophy teacher, who actually writes to him, who was a member of the MI, although he didn't know it at the time, and actually writes to him when he's in basic training, and that letter will help him get over the hump and inspire him to continue to stay through basic training. So again, there you are. So that's kind of a quick synopsis for you. But my major critique of this story is that even its genre is military science fiction. That is supposed to be one of the actioniest genres in science fiction. Yet this is not an action-heavy book. This is a philosophical book. This is a book that probably spends its 350 pages, at least 250 of those pages, doing things and talking about things that have no relation at all to the core plot of action, killing people, that sort of thing, right? That's not what this book is about. This book is about that very different thing. So it's a philosophical discussion. The voice of Heinlein can be seen, I think, as a reader through the voice of the high school teacher. And I think that Mr. Dubois, is to me the central character, because he's going to talk all about the negative things, aspects of our current society, how they were wrong, how us not paddling our kids led to juvenile delinquency, how, all these sorts of things. And I think he's being the voice of Heinlein in that moment. Now, there is a critical theory that when you read something, it's called the death of the author, in French, le mort d'auteur, and so it's called the death of the author. And the idea of the death of the author is that we shouldn't be focused so much about what the author meant when they wrote a work. We should be focused about how we are reading a work, the current modern context of it, right? When I read this work, I don't see it as satire. Him satiring conservative values, him satirizing the military and the love thereof, him satirizing that society. I don't see that when I'm reading the book. Instead, I see this as what he's trying to say, and so forth. So that's what I see when I read the book. Take Starship Troopers, the movie. There is a large amount of fascism in that movie that came out and that did a number of things. But the fascism that's in that movie is, I think, intentionally to be satiring. Paul Verhoeven, the director, is intentionally satirizing the fascist elements that might sometimes be read into Starship Troopers. And I think that's an intentional. And he's not being pro fascism. He's being anti-fascism. And I think you're seeing that again in this. But I don't see that in this story. I see this as not being a satire. I don't read the characters' words as satirical in nature. The society that they have is very different. It's not a fascist society. I've heard that critique from people that this is a fascist book. I don't see it. I don't see those sort of fascist elements here at all. In fact, I think for example, the military is a volunteer military. It opens up basic camp with more than 2,000 people, and by the time you're done, it has 180 some. you know, a fascist, pro-military world would not have a volunteer army, right? It would have conscription. It would have massive numbers of people rather than a small dedicated strike force that the mobile infantry is. And there are a number of other things too. Citizenship's only to people that had to do federal service. They're the ones that vote. They're the ones that can hold office. Federal service includes military service, although there are a couple of phrases where it talks about other things too. But there you are. I'll go ahead and leave you to it. What you think about it? Did you have any thoughts about my review of the movie, the novel, or its synopsis thereof? I'm happy to talk about it with you further below. You know, I'm happy to bring you to this classic of my favorite genre, the biggest classic and the biggest work in my favorite subgenre of science fiction for you. So if you enjoyed this, please feel free to let me know. Hit the subscribe button. And then finally, I just want to thank you for taking some time out of your day and watching my video. We all have so many things happening in our lives. So the fact that you spent this time with me, that is so humbling. And I really do appreciate that. Thanks again and have a good one.